In 2017, Universal Pictures unleashed The Mummy, starring Tom Cruise, and it was no ordinary movie. It was supposed to launch an entire dark universe of classic monsters. What could go wrong with a beloved property, a megastar, and franchise dreams? As it turns out, pretty much everything. From overbearing star power to a chaotic writer's room and dismal reviews, The Mummy became the Dummies guide on how not to make a movie. And in this video, we're going to explore exactly WTF happened to the 2017 The Mummy movie. But before I begin, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these marvelous videos. And now, let's begin. So, when Universal decided to redo the Mummy franchise, they were trying to do something absolutely novel and grand, something that the Mummy movies never did before. If that were a good thing or not, we'll figure it out by the end of the video. The 2017 movie was meant to start the Dark Universe, a shared cinematic universe reimagining Universal's classic monsters to compete with Marvel and DC's mega franchises. The studio assembled a writer's room and even unveiled a Dark Universe logo and theme. Big stars were courted for iconic roles. For instance, the likes of Johnny Depp was attached as the Invisible Man, Javier Bardem as Frankenstein's monster, and Angelina Jolie was to play the Bride of Frankenstein. In May 2017, just before The Mummy's release, Universal hyped the new franchise by posting a cast photo of Cruise, Sofia Boutella, Russell Crowe, Depp, and Bardem together, which, if you think about it, sounds like a monster version of the Avengers. Oh, and Sofia Boutella is the one who plays the resurrected Egyptian princess, Amanet. The Dark Universe plan was to interconnect these films through characters like Dr. Henry Jekyll, who appears in The Mummy as head of a secret monster hunting society. The filmmakers even dropped Easter eggs. For example, there was this vampire skull in Dr. Jekyll's lab, which was basically a tease for Dracula's future appearance. All the pieces seemed in place to usher in what was touted as a new world of gods and monsters. Universal's ambition was sky high. Unfortunately, The Mummy would crash land those dreams before they even took off. When you hire Tom Cruise, you expect star power, and that usually works in favor of movies. But there's a certain downside to certain actors who are as big as Mr. Cruise. Their star power makes their influence go into overdrive, and they try to cruise the movie according to their whims. The issue is, the best people to drive the movie are usually the director and writer. If anyone else tries to helm the ship, it mostly sinks. Doesn't matter if your name is Cruise. So Tom had nearly complete creative control over the project. During production, crew members noticed that Cruise was effectively calling the shots, micromanaging scenes, and acting as the de facto director whenever the actual director, Alex Kurtzman, struggled with the massive scope. Determined to mold the film to his own blockbuster formula, Cruise brought in his own trusted writers, like Christopher McQuarrie, to overhaul the script into a full-fledged Tom Cruise vehicle, while refocusing the story around his hero character and reducing the emphasis on Boutella's titular mummy. You see, the titular character is supposed to be the star of the show. I mean, she didn't have to be the good guy, but she needed equal screen time as the hero, if not more. However, Tom even pushed a new plot element where his character, Nick Morton, becomes cursed and possessed, only because the Mission Impossible man wanted to beef up the hero's arc. By all accounts, Cruise's word was law on set. If he wanted a line changed or a stunt done a certain way, it happened. Universal, for its part, publicly defended Cruise's extreme involvement, and even praised his unmatched commitment and true partner collaboration. But privately, there were concerns. Some on the crew felt Cruise's heavy hand was making a mess of an already shaky film, while others believed his instincts might save it. Even critics later remarked that the movie felt like it was at war with itself, and it was reduced to a standard Tom Cruise action flick that was awkwardly grafted onto a horror tale. So yeah, in The Mummy's case, the superstar's control didn't steer the ship to safety, it may have steered it right into an iceberg. For director Alex Kurtzman, The Mummy was a trial by fire. You see, when Mr. Kurtzman came into the project, he was primarily known as a writer-producer, and didn't have a lot of directing experience, especially for something of this scale. The production quickly turned into a cute little conundrum with creative carnage. With the studio's franchise expectations and Cruise's dominance, Kurtzman found himself caught between a rock and a hard place. Insiders even say that he struggled to handle the scope of the film as Cruise took the reins on action scenes and beyond. It's never easy for a director to lose control of a set, and by many accounts, The Mummy became a tug-of-war. The script was being rewritten on the fly by multiple contributors. The tone kept shifting, and the pressure to set up future movies was immense. Kurtzman later admitted the entire experience was painful, and that the film wasn't what I wanted it to be. In a frank reflection, he called The Mummy probably the biggest failure of my life, both personally and professionally, and he goes on to say that there were about 1 million things I regret about it. The set was filled with too many cooks in the kitchen, as he put it, with countless voices shaping and muddying the movie's direction. Rumors swirled that Universal executives were alarmed by how disjointed the project was becoming, but with cameras rolling and a release date set, the show had to go on. Kurtzman hasn't directed another film since this nightmare. Instead, he retreated to the calmer waters of television, where he had earlier successes. In short, The Mummy's production became a case study in how not to make a movie, especially one that's meant to launch a franchise. No expense was spared to make The Mummy a thrill ride, and nothing exemplifies that more than the ultra-hyped and super over-the-top zero-gravity plane crash sequence. In the film, there's a scene where a military transport plane spirals out of the sky with our heroes and the Mummy's sarcophagus aboard. Rather than relying on CGI and soundstage tricks, the team decided to film it for real in a reduced-gravity aircraft. The actual zero-G Airbus A310 used to film the Mummy's plane crash scene was an ambitious stunt that needed 64 parabolic dives to simulate weightlessness. Once again, it was Tom Cruise who insisted on a few things that the crew did not plan initially. Director Kurtzman had previously planned to shoot the crash with wires on a rotating set, but Cruise pushed for authenticity and succeeded in changing the director's mind. The production booked the specialized Vomit Comet plane to achieve real zero-G conditions. What followed was an Egyptian nightmare in its own right. As I mentioned, the cast and crew flew dozens of parabolic arcs to get the sequence right, and floated in midway as they were filmed. The stunt was as extreme as you'd expect, and many crew members got sick from the repeated weightless drops. Cruise and Annabelle Wallis had to coordinate their mid-air choreography while actually tumbling around the plane's cabin. The resulting sequence does look visceral on screen, and Universal heavily marketed it to show how far they'd go for spectacle. Yet, for all that effort, some critics argued it epitomized the film's problems. I mean, huge technical feats without a solid story foundation underneath means very little to the audience, or to common sense for that matter. Unfortunately, even the promotion of this scene was messed up because of an IMAX trailer which had an audio glitch that isolated Cruise's out-of-context grunts and screams, and the result was that this intense crash sequence was reduced to an internet meme. If The Mummy feels like a patchwork of ideas, that's because it was. The writing process went through an array of hands and revisions, which left the final film with a severe identity crisis of sorts. Multiple screenwriters were enlisted to doctor the script at various stages. From David Koepp to Christopher McQuarrie to Dylan Kurtzman, many people ultimately shared screenplay credit, and it was all on top of a story already written by Kurtzman, John Spates, and Jenny Lumet. In practice, that meant a lot of cooks stirring the pot. Each writer brought different things to the table, ranging from adventure and horror to comedy, and this first movie of the so-called dark universe was left looking like an overstuffed and overcooked stew where you could not tell one thing from another. So that's the reason why the film oscillated so much between multiple tones. One minute it's trying for horror, the next it's cracking buddy comedy jokes, and the next second it was setting up Jekyll and future monsters. Critics definitely noticed the jumble. Let alone critics, even laymen like me could see that. I remember reading this Entertainment Weekly article which described The Mummy as feeling like it was written by committee. Needless to say, the author of the post wanted to say it was derivative and unnecessary. In fact, the Guardian likewise pointed out the jumble of ideas and scenes from what looked like different screenplay drafts, saying the plot plays out as a mess. Another major issue was this dire need to plant seeds for sequels and spin-offs. I mean, that should never be a movie's endgame, to produce a franchise, that is. You do that if your movie does well, and I guess Universal learned their lesson, albeit the hard way. Exposition was shoehorned in to introduce the secret organization Prodigium, explain Amanet's elaborate backstory, and tease other monsters, and all of this bogged down the story itself. In aiming to launch a franchise, the writers pretty much forgot to make a coherent standalone story. As a result, the finished film feels simultaneously over-explained and undercooked. Too many voices, too many mandates, and no singular vision. That writing by committee approach ultimately cursed The Mummy as much as any ancient tomb hex. When The Mummy finally hit theaters in June 2017, audience reactions were as cold as a sarcophagus in winter. The film opened to a weak $31.7 million in its first weekend in North America, which was the lowest debut of any Mummy film, and far below Universal's expectations. Domestically speaking, it somehow crawled to about $80 million total, and it was left utterly overshadowed by a certain DC superheroine from Themyscira, who is basically dominating the summer box office. International audiences were a bit kinder though, as the film earned about $329 million overseas, including a strong showing in China. But then, they don't see a lot of Tom Cruise or Mummy movies, I guess, so the bar was low. But even with a global haul of $410 million, the math was not mathing. Thanks to a swollen production budget and extensive marketing costs, analysts estimated The Mummy needed around $450 million just to break even. It fell short and likely lost the studio up to $95 million. Financially, it was a flop for such a high-profile release. But even more fatal were the reviews. Critics tore into The Mummy like a swarm of scarab beetles. It scored a dismal 15% on Rotten Tomatoes, and the general consensus was that the Tom Cruise vehicle lacked the campy fun of the franchise's most recent entries and failed to deliver many monster movie thrills. Audiences weren't thrilled either. The cinema score was a mediocre B-, which indicated poor word of mouth. To cap it off, the film won Tom Cruise a Razzie for Worst Actor and also got nominations for Worst Picture, Director, and Screenplay at the Golden Raspberry Awards. In short, The Mummy was critically massacred, and along with it, the dreams of getting that dark universe started were crushed under the weight of the fallen mummy. Let's talk about this in some detail. In the wake of The Mummy's accident at the box office, Universal's dark universe was put on ice indefinitely. The dominoes began falling quickly. The next film in the pipeline, A New Bride of Frankenstein, with Angelina Jolie rumored to star, was originally slated for February 2019, but by October 2017, just a few months after The Mummy opened, Universal pulled the plug and postponed Bride of Frankenstein indefinitely. The writing was on the wall, or perhaps on the tomb walls. By late 2017, the architects of the franchise, Alex Kurtzman and producer Chris Morgan, quietly left their roles as the supposed overseers of the Monsterverse. The Dark Universe office at the Universal lot went empty after being buzzing with writers developing future installments like The Invisible Man, The Wolfman, Creature from the Black Lagoon, and even Phantom of the Opera. Yep, all these movies were shelved and shuttered. In early 2019, Universal officially acknowledged the obvious when they revealed that they would be taking a more individualized approach to their classic monsters instead. In other words, no more forcing an interconnected saga, at least for the time being. One Universal executive even said that these characters work best when reinvented through the prism of each new filmmaker, without trying to cram them into a single continuity. And you know what? That makes total sense. The plan now was to let standalone monster films flourish on their own merits. So yeah, we can probably consider it to be the shortest-lived cinematic universe in Hollywood history. The tale of The Mummy from 2017 is very much a case study in blockbuster overreach and a lesson that all studios can benefit from. And it's always better to learn from someone else's mistakes than your own. So what lessons can be extracted from the bandages of this disaster? First and foremost, story comes first. Universal's mistake was putting the franchise cart before the horse. In their rush to build a universe, they forgot to make a single good movie. Stuffing The Mummy with setups for sequels and spin-offs backfired spectacularly, and audiences can more often than not smell when a film is more interested in advertising teasing future installments than telling a cohesive story. And critics certainly noticed all the Dark Universe teases and convoluted threads that barely qualify as a film on their own. Marvel earned its universe after carefully building strong standalone entries. Universal tried to jump straight to the connected universe and fell on its face. In fact, this is the very reason why the DC universe fell flat on its face. Even they tried to compete with the Avengers and brought on the Justice League movie, and look what happened. Another lesson to be learnt from The Mummy is that the tone matters, especially for beloved material. The Brendan Fraser-led Mummy films of the late 90s and early 2000s succeeded because they were fun, swashbuckling adventures with a sense of humor amidst the supernatural peril. By contrast, the 2017 Mummy went for a darker, more horror-driven tone, but also tried to be an action blockbuster, which was an awkward middle ground that pleased nobody. Brendan Fraser himself pinpointed the issue. The ingredient that we had going for our Mummy, which I didn't see in the 2017 film, was fun. The Mummy should be a thrill ride, but not terrifying and scary. The project also became a handbook on the limitations and flaws of too much star power. Tom Cruise is one of the biggest movie stars on the planet, and is known for elevating high-octane action films. But even he couldn't carry this enterprise to safety. If anything, his oversized influence homogenized the movie into a standard Cruise thriller by diluting what made The Mummy unique. The lesson for studios is that even an A-lister can't guarantee success if the film around them is a mess. No actor is a silver bullet for poor creative decisions. Finally, the fallout taught Universal to be flexible and listen to the audience and critical feedback. The cancellation of the Dark Universe in favor of individual monster stories shows the studio course-correcting. Rather than persisting out of pride, they acknowledged the failure and shifted strategy. In a way, The Mummy's failure freed these characters to find new life in different forms. In 2020, for example, The Invisible Man was reinvented as a standalone modern thriller with great success, vindicating the new approach. It's been a few years since The Mummy unraveled. So where did the key players end up once the dust settled? Or in this case, the sand. Tom Cruise, ever the Teflon superstar, shook off the setback as if it were a mere mummy's curse in one of his movies. His career momentum hardly slowed, and within a year, he was back on top with Mission Impossible Fallout in 2018. And in 2022, he soared to even greater heights with Top Gun Maverick. And then he gave us several other blockbusters in the years to come. In short, Cruise came out unscathed. The same can't be said for others. Director Alex Kurtzman pivoted away from film directing after the Mummy debacle. He returned to his comfort zone in television and found great success there and became a driving force in the Star Trek TV universe. Kurtzman has publicly stated that, painful as the Mummy was, it made him a stronger filmmaker going forward. What about the Dark Universe itself? After its aborted launch, Universal quietly disbanded the grand crossover idea, but not the monsters. Instead, they started rehabilitating these characters one by one. The first big success of this approach was The Invisible Man from 2020, which was produced on a modest budget with Blumhouse Productions and directed by Leigh Whannell. That film was basically a tense modern horror thriller starring Elizabeth Moss, and it earned critical raves and solid box office collections, all with no Tom Cruise in sight and no burden of setting up a universe. It proved that the classic monsters could still draw audiences if handled with a fresh, filmmaker-driven take. Universal also developed Renfield in 2023, a horror comedy centered on Dracula's familiar, and there are talks of new versions of Wolfman, Frankenstein, and more as standalone projects. As for the Mummy franchise specifically, it might not stay entombed forever. According to recent reports, Universal is exploring new Mummy projects, including a possible prequel and even a direct sequel to the Brendan Fraser-led series that fans still adore. With Fraser enjoying a career resurgence and the Oscar-y one in 2023, the studio may be eyeing a return to that winning formula of adventure and fun. Nothing's officially confirmed, but the fact that these rumors exist shows Universal hasn't given up on the Mummy. They're just cautious now about how to bring it back from the dead. In the end, the 2017 Mummy was a monumental misstep that derailed the universe and forced everyone involved to rethink their approach. So that was all in this one, guys. See you in the next one. Oh, and if you want another WTF video on a certain topic, let me know in the comments.